ordering on the screens, but maybe a couple of faces that I didn't see yesterday. So just to give you a little bit of a map of what we're doing. And we're looking at two texts. We're looking at there are two connected texts, the Anapanasati Sutta, which is a text basically that describes the mindfulness of breathing practice, and the Satipatthana Sutta, which is a text that describes how we take awareness into the main dimensions of our experience. And the main directions of experience, main dimensions are body, feelings, mental states, and objects of mind, which basically means everything else, everything that the mind can attend to. And the reason we're using both texts is they're quite complementary. So the Anapanasati Sutta really is a practice text. It just sort of gives you quite precise instructions about how we take our awareness into our experience. And the Satipatthana text is a bit more of an unpacking and a description of the aspects of experience when we start to look at them. So the Anapanasati Sutta, not to oversimplify too much, tells us how we take our awareness in. And the Satipatthana Sutta has an element of that, but it's got a fuller description of what it is that we're attending to exactly. So in a sense, the Satipatthana Sutta gives us a map for what we're looking at in the Anapanasati Sutta. And the Anapanasati Sutta gives us a way of experientially engaging with the dimensions of experience that the Satipatthana Sutta describes. So it's a wee bit more complex than that. Satipatthana Sutta is quite an encyclopedic text, and it gathers a number of different practices, but it is quite a kind of thorough treatment of each of these main dimensions of experience. So what we're doing in the mornings is using the Anapanasati Sutta, the Anapanasati text, to just support our meditation practice, and we're kind of following that as a structure. And in the afternoons, we're basically studying a little bit more. We're looking in a bit more detail, looking in dialogue at the Satipatthana Sutta and the kind of areas of experience that it's describing, and just checking that against our own experience. So that's the kind of structure of how we're looking at the two texts. And the core of the Anapanasati Sutta, Anapana just means in and out breath. Sati just means mindfulness. So the Anapanasati Sutta is the sutta on mindfulness of the in and out breath. So it's the sort of classic mindfulness of breathing instruction. And the 4-stage mindfulness of breathing that we usually do is based on the first 4 verses of the Anapanasati Sutta. So aware of the breath in the body, the kind of calming, the one-pointedness, all of that comes from the first 4 verses of the kind of method described in the Anapanasati Sutta. And today we're going to go on to the second set of verses. And they're moving on to the second of the Satipatthanas, the feelings. So let's say a little bit about that. When I was reading this stuff, I was getting quite sort of excited. I was thinking, what a significant area of experience this is. And I'm going to try and sort of rein myself in. I've decided I'm not going to come across like a Protestant zealot, which is my kind of cultural training. So I'm just going to try and mindfully, calmly approach this whole area of experience. But just to give you a little bit of a sense of the drama of it. So this is a quote from Sangharakshita's Living with Awareness. And he says, in regard to this stage, that being able to identify feelings in the sense of vedana is what makes it possible for us to follow the Buddhist path. So the bit of the text that we're looking at this morning is looking at the area of experience that makes it possible to follow the Buddhist path. So that does sort of lift the drama off it a wee bit, doesn't it? It sort of lifts the stakes a little bit. So let's try and explain why. So the text itself, well, actually, maybe before that, we should just say something about vedana and what vedana means. So vedana gets translated as feelings. And feelings in this sense aren't emotions. It's just the sort of tone of what we feel. So it's whether or not our experience is on a spectrum from being pleasant to being unpleasant, or some point in between. And emotion is how we respond to that. So somebody says something to us that's pleasant, that's kind of complimentary. That's a pleasant vedana, and we say thank you. We feel grateful. We express that gratitude. The pleasant feeling is the vedana. The move into action, that the sort of shaping of our experience and gratitude, the action of saying thanks, that's being powered by the emotion. Somebody says something unpleasant to us, it's just, so it's got a feeling tone to it that's unpleasant. We get angry, we move into action to defend ourselves. That getting angry and the moving into action is the emotion. But the tone that first lands on us, the unpleasantness of it, even the pain of it, is the vedana. So what we're looking at in the vedana is that basic quality of experience before our mind responds and before our mind reacts. So the second half of the verse starts to look a bit at the shape the reactions take. But to begin with, we're just looking at what they call the hedonic tone, which might not be that helpful, but the kind of flavor, the taste of the experience itself. So that's vedana. In a way, it's quite a simple aspect of our experience, but not one that we always are very conscious of. So starting to become conscious of it and starting to become aware of how we respond to it is what makes practice possible, and what moves us from our habitual reactions that we get caught in into something that's more liberated and more free. So this stage is just starting to describe that transition from habit and caught into something more aware and more free. So let's have a look at the text. So the text says, sensitive to PT. Actually, sorry, first of all, it says, one trains oneself. And I want to keep on sort of emphasizing this. I think sometimes when people practice, you can feel a bit frustrated because the experience that you're having isn't necessarily the bliss that the text is describing. And you can sort of set a marker that you then measure yourself against and judge yourself to have failed by. But this idea that what we're involved in is a training. So you're just starting to take awareness into what the mind strongly, habitually does. And that strong habit isn't going to go away immediately. But by starting to take awareness into that, you just start to open up this possibility of choice. And to begin with, you're going to catch yourself after the event. You get triggered, you respond the way you always respond, but you start to notice it. And then just gradually we catch it a little earlier in the process. And then gradually there's a moment of choice where we choose to do something different. And this idea that what we're involved in is a training, it needs a bit of patience. So, just to start to take awareness, notice what happens, notice what we do, get a sense of what the option is, and gradually we kind of feel our way in to something a bit more flexible, a bit more, a bit newer. And that's what this set of verses is trying to describe. It's where we're starting to train our attention to go. And it's okay for that to take time. It will take some time. So just a bit of clear about where we're trying to go and a bit of patience about the process of going there. But anyway, having said that, first verse is sensitive to piti, I breathe in, I breathe out. Then sensitive to sukha, I breathe in, I breathe out. Sensitive to mental processes, I breathe in, I breathe out. And calming mental processes, I breathe in, I breathe out. So that's the instruction. I'll say something about each of the verses again, just to give us a bit of a map about what it is that we're doing. So one of the things that the sutta kind of stresses is that you've got an unfolding process happening. And it started off by becoming aware of the breath and becoming aware of the body. So that there's already a shift in our habitual relationship to our experience. We're just starting to notice that the very sort of basic, grounded, embodied experience, we're starting to attend to it and we're starting to connect to it. And this metaphor that we got from the four remainings, this image of sitting with the body like a mountain, that there's something about what somebody called embodied awareness that's got a kind of groundedness and a stability to it. So it's not us, that most of you are probably too young to remember this, but there used to be a comic strip in the Beezer called The Numbskulls. And the numbskulls were all the little people who lived in your head, who were looking out through your eyes and your ears. So mindfulness is not like that. It's not the spiritual numbskull looking out at our experience. This idea that the awareness is in the body, this sort of sense of embodied, grounded, rooted quality to our awareness is the foundation stone. And then we go from there to awareness of the breath, this sort of fluid, changing experience. And then out of that sense of connection to ourselves, we're a bit less caught in mental chatter, in attending to the body and attending to the breath. Just there's a bit of space around our experience, and there's a kind of natural releasing into that space. So the fourth verse in the first section is calming the body. I breathe in, I breathe out. And you get this sort of pattern of, first of all, we connect to experience. In the connection, we create some space around it. And in that space, there's a natural process of relaxing and releasing. And that process of connecting, space, relaxing and releasing carries on right through the sutta. Happens in feelings, happens in our mental states, and it happens in our relationship to the whole field of experience. So that kind of repeating pattern is worth getting a little bit of a feel for. So the next verse, we've gone from aware of the body to the sense of the body calming. And the next verse is sensitive to piti. I breathe in, I breathe out. Now, piti in different translations, it gets translated as pleasure. It gets translated as, I think, bliss, one of the translations of it. But let's stick with piti because all of the English words have particular connotations. And what piti is getting at is that there's something intrinsically pleasurable about waking up to our own experience. That as we connect to ourselves, that to go from disconnected to connected, to go from all over the place to joined up, to go from cut off from ourselves to alive to ourselves. Something about plugging in to the life of the body, the vitality of the body, plugging into something that's got a bit of breathing room about it, plugging into the life of our feelings. It's an experience of being more alive. And there's something about that accessibility, presence to our own vitality, to our own kind of experience starting to flow together, that's got a feeling tone to it. And that feeling tone's pleasurable. And you get it, even just something of, if the body's been tense and it releases, it's a pleasure. If your mind's all over the place and it's able to sit with experience for a minute, and just the shock of waking up and feeling what we feel, it's a pleasure. And I think this idea that spiritual practice is pleasurable is quite an important one. So, like Buddhism uses a lot this language of transcending pain, or the cessation of pain. And all of that is crucially important. But the flip side of that is that what you're moving into is a much more deeply satisfying relationship to our experience. The quality of being sort of more and more mindful, it is basically a quality that, like, it's a sort of an aesthetic awareness. Imagine a lot of you have been on retreat, right? And like most of you have had that moment where you've been in a meditation, your mind might even have been all over the place in the meditation, but you walk out of the shrine room and you're looking at the world round about you, and it's like somebody's turned up the saturation on the colour. Everything's a bit more vivid, everything's a bit more distinct, you're a bit more kind of impacted by it, you're a bit more alive to it. And that kind of sensitivity, that kind of responsiveness, there's the famous Dhammapada verse that if we're not mindful, it's like we're already dead. And those who are mindful start to go beyond death. And, to use less dramatic language, just as you start to wake up, your whole experience becomes richer, deeper, more deeply connected. And what's being described here is you're just starting to notice the feeling tone of what it's like to be more deeply connected to yourself. So sensitive to piti, I breathe in, I breathe out. And you're not trying to make anything happen in the practice. You're just starting to attend to what naturally emerges as a consequence of being a bit more connected to ourselves. So that's the first verse. You're just noticing the feeling tone of what it's like to be a bit more mindful. What does it feel like to be aware of the body, aware of the breath, the sense of the body calming? So what does that feel like? Just starting to attend to that. And an important point, I think the first point is, you want that element of spirit of pleasure in your spiritual practice. If your practice isn't a pleasure, you can only sustain discipline for so long. At some point, you've actually got to start looking forward to practice. And your practice, you're going to look forward to it if you're plugging into something that's more deeply satisfying than what we habitually do. So this attending to the pleasurable dimension of practice is quite significant, quite important. Second point to make is, when you get some of the traditional descriptions of this, it can sound quite dramatic. Like they talk about the piti, where the hair on the back of your neck stands up. And they talk about the piti that actually feels like you're levitating. So piti can sound kind of dramatic, but there's a spectrum to piti, and it can start quite subtle. Just for the body to be a little less tense. It's not a dramatic experience, but it's a relief. And just to start to be alive to that sense of relief is starting to move into piti. So sometimes the piti can be quite subtle. But one of the things about practice, there's a little verse in the Majjhima Nikaya that says, what you attend to becomes stronger. So if we start to notice the PT that's there, you start to attend to it, you just sort of clear a space that allows it to become a stronger current in our experience. And again, you're not trying to force it, you're not trying to hang on to it beyond its natural life, but you're just noticing what's there. And in the noticing, you give it some space and you give it some energy. So that's the first verse, sensitive to PT. I breathe in, I breathe out. Second verse is sensitive to sukha. I breathe in, I breathe out. And again, sukha sometimes gets translated as happiness. It sometimes gets translated as bliss. But the sort of sense of it is a deep level of contentment and satisfaction from our experience. Satisfaction is maybe a bit too complacent a word. Contentment might be better. But it's the sort of sense of it being satisfying to be available to our experience as it is. And traditionally, piti and sukha are connected. So piti's an experience that's kind of new. It's us starting to connect a level of energy, a strand of experience that's a bit unfamiliar. So it's got an element of excitement about it. And sukha is this sense of the same pleasure, but it's not such a kind of destabilizing thing. It's got this space around it that allows it to be there, but the pleasure doesn't die down, but the excitement dies down. So again, there's just space around the experience that doesn't make the experience any less, but it makes the awareness available to it a bit more. So sukha is piti going deeper. It's piti with the awareness saturating it a bit more, able to contain it a little bit more. And another thing about sukha is that Analayo, a writer called Bhikkhu Analayo, does a very good commentary on the Anapanasati Sutta. And one of the points that he makes is that sukha is always available. That sense of availability and contentment to our experience is always available. If you don't mind, I'm just going to go for a slightly dramatic example of this. My mum died last year. And at the time of death, there's grief. But I was really appreciating my practice, because one of the things that you can do with a practice is you're just learning how to be available to your own experience. And I think with grief, the instincts to want to resist it. But I think what you're doing in mindfulness practice is any experience that's there, you're able to turn towards it. And because you've set up this stable, calm, available quality of awareness, you're able to come into relationship to it. You're able to come into connection to it without losing your own kind of stability. I'm trying not to make this sound clinical. I don't know if Sri Siddhi is on this call. She was there yesterday. But I remember being on a retreat with Sri Sambhava and Prakasha a few years ago. And something that Prakasha said, who was leading the retreat, really struck in my mind. He said, feelings just want to be felt. And any feeling felt fully is blissful. And just this idea that sukha isn't only looking on the bright side. It's a capacity to be available to our whole spectrum of experience, really able to connect with it and to kind of come into relationship with it in a way that we don't need to resist. Our awareness is big enough, stable enough to allow us to fully feel it, and without losing the sense of, in that case, the sense of loss, the sense of sadness. There was still something deeply satisfying about being whole, just wholly available to what's arising. So sukha has this sense of a quality of stable availability to our experience, no matter what it is. And out of that capacity to be available to our experience comes a deep sense of contentment. And it's not the contentment of complacency, it's the contentment of a capacity to be alive to our experience, whatever it is, without clinging to it and without resisting it. And out of that comes something quite significantly different in our relationship to experience. Sorry, that's a little bit more than I meant to say. But so PT, just noticing what's pleasurable about our experience, noticing the satisfaction in that, and then that satisfaction of being able to be in relationship and available to our experience, stabilizing and becoming sukha, the sort of bliss of feelings fully felt. So that's the first half of the verse. Second half of the verse starts to be quite significant, actually, that this is us moving on to the bit that makes Buddhist practice possible. So the verse says, sensitive to mental processes, I breathe in. Sensitive to mental processes, I breathe out. So the word here is chitta sankara. The word that's being translated as mental processes is chitta sankara. And chitta sankara, chitta means mind. Sankara means it's the same word as samskara, I think. So it's the sort of shape that something is taking. So chitta sankara is either being aware of what's shaping the mind, or it's being aware of the shape that the mind is taking. So we'll become aware of PT, we'll become aware of sukha. And the point that's being made here is that feelings shape our experience. Our mind takes a shape in response to how we feel, basically. And in traditional Buddhist psychology, this is an absolutely pivotal point. If you know that the sequence, there's a sort of description of how the mind traps itself, a description called the 12 nidanas. And it goes through the stages of how we create suffering for ourselves. And that there's one key strand, or one key step in this set of nidanas. And that key step is the step from feeling, which is just a fact of experience. But feeling in this nidana chain is followed by craving. And craving is how we self-referentially respond to feeling. And in some of the traditional diagrams of the Wheel of Life, the Buddha is pointing at this diagram of 12 segments of a circle. And the bit that he's pointing to is this step from feeling to craving. And what's being said is that at this moment, it's possible to bring awareness in and not to move to what the mind habitually does. So what we're looking at in this bit of the meditation is that step. It's starting to take awareness into feeling and to look at how we can stop the mind from doing what it habitually does and doing something different. When I was thinking about this, the thing that came to mind is that a lot of the time our mind just gets caught in response to whatever it is that is impinging on our awareness. And the traditional image for this is the 5 hindrances. So it's saying that a lot of the time our hindrance is either for having a pleasurable experience. The image is the mind, it's water saturated by dye. So it's very pretty, but it's lost its clarity. If something unpleasant happens, we respond with anger or with irritation or with fear or with depression. And the image for that is the water coming to a boil. The whole thing's disturbed and bubbling, and you can't see the sort of depth of it. Sometimes when you're meditating, it's not that you've got a strong experience of craving. It's not that you've got a strong experience of aversion. All you've got is your mind is all over the place. So the image for that is water chopped up by waves. So, you know, there's no particular pull of any direction, but just the mind's habit of being restless. There's a fourth image that is the image of doubt, which is just like you're not quite sure what to do with your experience. And the image of that is a bowl of water that somebody's poured mud into, so the whole thing's muddy and opaque. And the fifth traditional image is the image of what's called sloth and torpor. We're just too tired to engage with experience, and that's an image of water gradually being algae, plants, you know, the whole thing being kind of made solid by what's growing in it. So it's not water anymore. And the image that you're trying to get to in meditation is the mind still and the mind clear. So the step that we're making is, rather than the mind being caught in any of these habitual reactions, is you're just looking at what you've already set up. So you've got a quality of awareness that's grounded, you're connected to the breath, the body's calmed, you're connected to the pleasure of experience. There's a flavor to mindfulness. It's attentive, it's emotionally whole. And that's the ground that we step into relationship from. So we're trying not to ever lose that sense of connection to ourselves, connection to our own feeling, and the kind of responsiveness that that feeling makes possible. So to quote Analio again, he says, what you're doing in this verse is that you're recognizing that mental processes happen. So you're not going to sit down in meditation and your meditation to suddenly beautifully become, your mind to become blank, right? I don't know if you've found this, but sometimes it's not quite like that. Okay, your mind does what it does. And what's being said here is that you're not expecting the mental processes to stop. What's crucial is the quality of relationship that we bring to the mental processes. And Analio's image, and it's quite a familiar image, but he says it's like a mother watching her kids play. And you can look at the kids playing, you can feel very tender towards the kids playing, but you don't have to join in the game. So you're watching the mind do what it habitually does. You're watching its habitual obsessions, and you don't have to fight it. You don't have to try and resist it. You don't have to try and stop it, but you don't get caught in it either. So there's this sort of move back all the time to the open awareness and that deeper sense of connection to ourselves. One of the things that's significant about this coming up in the feeling version is the feeling tone is giving you really important information about whether or not you're caught in the distraction or not. That sense of calm, that sense of piti, that sense of sukha comes out of that quality of connected awareness. And mental activity is very complex. If you're trying to track your mental activity, you can easily get lost in it. If what you're doing is paying attention to whether you feel connected or not, you've got a very, very simple cue about whether you've lost the mindfulness or whether you're still connected to it. One of the mind training verses from the 8-point mind training says, whenever disturbing emotions arise, may I firmly face them and avert them. So it's like the disturbing emotion is the thing that tells you whether or not you're still connected to yourself. So what you're doing in this stage is you're watching what the mind habitually does. You're not trying to stop it, but you're not getting caught in it. This image of the mother, you're connected to yourself, you're connected to your awareness, you're connected to the emotional stability of sukha. And whenever it starts to become disturbed, it's just a reminder to go back to connection to the body, connection to the breath, spaciousness and calm, and an aliveness to how you feel. And if you start to stay connected to that, that quality of connected, stable awareness is what we start to bring to all our experience. And at that point, we're starting to make a significant shift in our spiritual practice. You're starting to move from a conditioned mind into a free mind. And it's just this very simple training, again, that we're coming from that sense of stability that the first 6 verses have given us access to. You're attending to whatever arises, and whenever it starts to get disturbed, it's a reminder to go back to that sense of connection. So you're just sustaining the sense of open, connected awareness to your experience. And then the last verse is calming mental processes. And what's being said there is that, again, to quote an Alio, he says, we're aware of the activity of the mind without acting ourselves. So we're not feeding the habits the way we usually do. We're not getting caught in the mental processes. We're not giving them new energy. And because we're not giving them energy, we're not fighting them, but we're not feeding them. So just gradually, because they're not being fed, because where our energy and attention is going is into creating the awareness, just gradually they run out of energy and they gradually, naturally start to calm down. And again, just this image of the waves of the water start to settle and the water's left still and it's left clear. So at the end of this stage, we've gone from a sense of connection to ourselves to an availability to what's arising without being caught in it, to that naturally allowing the mind to settle and the mind to calm. And maybe just one other point to make, that analogy of the mother looking after her child. It's a familiar image from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. And I think one of the things that's been said in this is that mindfulness isn't something clinical. It's as much love as it is awareness. It's a living connection to our own unfolding, emerging experience. And it's got both that quality of clarity and awareness, but also a quality of care, quality of as pleasurable emotion arises, we take pleasure in it. As painful emotion arises, we respond to it with care and kindness, so that there's as much a quality of metta in this tetrad as there is of mindfulness. The two qualities kind of are just two different dimensions of the same quality of openness and aliveness to experience. Anyway, sorry, it's a simple practice, even though I think it starts to go quite deep. I just want to make sure that under all that rhetoric, I managed to say enough clearly about what it is that we're actually trying to do in the practice. Any questions about that before we actually do the practice? I'll talk us through it, so I'll give us little hints about the practice. Okay, again, I'll take silence as assent. And Do you want a 5-minute leg stretch, or are you good to go straight into the practice? All right, I'm getting some thumbs up on screen 1. So let's just so a minute or two just to let the noise settle. Sort of let our minds get a wee bit less discursive. And we do that just in our own time by finding our way back to our breath, back to our body. And we're just plugging into this unfolding process of deepening awareness. To begin with, just reminding ourselves that for the next 30 minutes, we're just going to drop what usually pulls on our attention, what preoccupies us. Just attend a bit more deeply to our experience. Getting our seat stable and firm. That sense of grounded, embodied awareness. Knowing our experience with our whole body. Having that sense of what mindfulness feels like. What does it feel like right now when we're bringing that intention to be more available to our experience? Becoming aware of our bodies again. sense of supported by the cushion, supported by the ground. Just becoming aware of our whole body. And becoming aware of the next in-breath, becoming aware of it as something we feel in our body. And the foundation of this whole practice, just starting to become interested in, curious about the experience of breathing. What does this breath feel like? Connected at the beginning of the breath, middle of the breath, the end of the breath. when it feels appropriate, just allowing the awareness of the breath to go into the background, and the awareness of the sensations of the whole body to come to the foreground. Aware of the whole body. I breathe in, I breathe out. Our attention wanders, just remembering this idea that it's a training, not allowing any impatience or irritation, just noticing that it's happened. And just looking for what helps us to connect back to the direct experience of the breath and the body. Just becoming aware of any experience of calm that's naturally there. Noticing any sense of the body, a little more relaxed, a little less held. If we need to, just breathing in to any tension that's there. And on the out breath, we let it go. Calming the body. I breathe in, I breathe out. Just broadening our awareness out to include how we feel right now. On that spectrum from pleasant to unpleasant. Just having a sense of the tone of our experience. And in particular, just noticing, attending to any aspect of our experience right now that's pleasurable. Maybe a sense of what it's like when the body's a bit more relaxed. We're a bit more connected to it. Maybe being a bit more alive to the sensations of the breath. It's there right now. It's got something of that feeling tone of pleasure to it, of piti. Just notice if by attending to it, by turning towards it, we can give it a bit more space in our experience. then whatever our experience is right now, looking for a sense of contentment in relationship to it. Doing the practice, we're attending to our experience, looking for that open-hearted sensitivity to feeling. And just looking for that sense of being available, being present to whatever arises, contentment to be with whatever arises. Whenever we lose connection with that, just going back a step, connecting back to the breath, connecting back to the body, connecting back to that sense of calm. And out of that sense of connection to ourselves, just noticing mental activity, however it presents itself. Maybe feelings, maybe trains of thought. Just bringing that mind to mind, that image of a mother attending to her children. Just noticing mental activity without actively getting caught in it. Don't have to fight it. Don't have to get caught in it. Just staying with that grounded, calm awareness. Sense of availability, sense of spaciousness. Just using the feeling tone as a cue. That sense of contentment gives us a clue of whether or not we're staying connected to our experience. Where there's a sense of disturbance, just connecting back to the breath. In the same way that we let go of the tension in our body, just that sense of spaciousness and letting go of any tightness around mental activity. Calming mental activity. I breathe in, I breathe out. And just gradually bringing our awareness back into the room, bringing the practice to a close. Let's have a quick 5-minute leg stretch. We'll finish off with a short period of just sitting. So we'll start that in 5 minutes from now.